Yo, what is up, everybody? So I decided that I would do another video on an aiming report because we got a final report from Minigod, who coached STYKO. So in the previous one that I covered, it was EliGE being coached by Matty, because Matty released the full report, essentially, of the entire program. So, what their aims and goals were, what EliGE wanted to achieve, the weaknesses and strengths that they saw along the way. And then we saw the kind of before and after GIFs that showed the interventions Matty took to help EliGE, improve in various categories of aiming, where he showed weaknesses at the beginning of the program. And so it's very cool to have that level of transparency to see precisely how Matty was thinking with regards to how he coached EliGE, but then to see the benefits. And after that particular program as well, EliGE ended up being the top rated player at the next event that he played. So definitely impressive. And so great. And Minigod, obviously another renowned aiming coach, had to make a video. So if this is the first time you're seeing this, we're gonna dive into the program. We're gonna read and sort of learn, from maybe we'll see some similar issues that maybe STYKO's having to issues that we're having, and maybe we'll be able to learn some good approaches that we could take, or maybe it will help us to understand where maybe we're having some issues. So let's get into it. So first things first, we've got the introduction. So you can see here a mixture of STYKO's sort of like main goals. And so the first one is just improving in-game consistency for his performance. You've got an additional note here from Mini where he kind of describes how he understands consistency. I really appreciate that he put this in here. It's very important to know how the coach thinks with regards to things like this. So he states that we're treating it as a long-term goal while focusing on making small but consistent improvements over time. It's not easy to stay consistent due to a lot of small factors, so we focus on increasing the level of our average aim performance by working on our aim fundamentals and habits during practice. So we've got a more kind of generalized approach. So I'm sure we'll see more about this in the following paragraphs in this document. And then the next goal as well was to spot the aim strengths and weaknesses with a concrete plan of working around them. So you can see that, to have this one here kind of suggests that, STYKO maybe doesn't even understand maybe where some of his strengths and weaknesses are. So, I think that's an important note to make, that, pro players themselves, just because they're pro players, they may not, they're not going to necessarily have a formalized understanding of how to even categorize their mistakes with language. I know that this is bad, but what is that thing? Is it, what category of aim is this? What defines this problem? How can I then attack this problem if I can't even define it? So that tends to be an issue that, getting to a high level of anything you can have that, because you get to be quite elite, and then you get stuck because things are really complicated. And we can't all necessarily have the time and to kind of just do deep dives into these things. That's why we need coaches. That's their job. Okay, so aiming mechanics pertaining to Counter-Strike were trained in the tasks provided in the routine that we use throughout the duration of the program. These tasks are specifically designed to help tactical FPS aiming techniques and force players into isolated aiming situations. Okay, so that all makes sense. And then okay, so we've got a list here of sort of the essential TAC FPS mechanics. So, and then we've got, if followed by the description of that, we've then got the aiming category that kind of goes with that. So the first one is flicking technique and flick accuracy, and the categories are static clicking and target switching. Then the second one is click timing and micro corrections, and this is static clicking and dynamic clicking and precise target switching. And then we have stability, so flick scenarios, smooth and precise tracking. Lastly, we see movement reading, dynamic clicking and evasive target switching and tracking. Okay, so this is helpful again. I think this is really helpful for people because it's very difficult to even go into an aim trainer and start working on your weaknesses if you can't really define them. So it's important, I think, to sort of have some of these associations in mind in terms of the technique and then sort of the affiliated categories that it belongs in. So areas of improvement we've identified in our introduction sessions. So the introduction sessions tend to work with AMPed by you sending, as a person who is going to be the student, you sending in some footage, like a few hours of footage of you playing, DMs, whatever it is, and then the coach will look at it and he'll be able to kind of have a start off point of, stuff where he can see clear issues or things that, you can definitely kind of work on that coincide with the goals of the student. So we've got the summary of our program. Okay. So predictive click timing before and an active click timing approach after. So bear this in mind. The active word here is significant. It is not in the first GIF here. So let's take a look at the progress we've made. In this section, we will highlight the issues we faced and how our aim changed after adapting to new approaches and techniques used on mechanics that were important to us. So, okay. So here we can see that we've got the predictive click timing approach, and you can see there's a lot missing here. Trying to aim with movement, really kind of gambling that the opponent's going to move into the crosshair. Then you can see that the opponent kind of has these more shallower strafes and doesn't actually end up meeting the crosshair on the kind of right side from the perspective of the shooter. So definitely some issues there. It just feels inconsistent. So whenever you have aiming styles that are about reading player movement, it's not necessarily optimal, because the differentiation between player movement, player to player, everyone has slightly different timings and sort of habits. And so in certain situations like this, things can get very awkward if you're trying to aim like that, and you can really whiff a lot. But what is going to be more guaranteed is this technique, the active click timing approach, where you can see that STYKO, regardless as to what his opponent's doing, he's just reacting and just micro correcting. React, micro correct, react, micro correct. And that is going to be consistent, because no matter what your opponent is doing, you can just react to it. So this is, I think I'm going to go off on a little bit of a side tangent here, because I think this is an interesting distinction for those nerds out there who appreciate these things. So one of the ways that I like to think of, in the context of aiming in video games, one of the ways I like to think about this is on a scale, because the opposite of, let's say, predictive is reactivity. These are the two in terms of in the context of aiming, because you can either be completely reactive or you can be aiming predictively. Like to predict is to start, guessing as to where they're going to go, and then to kind of be prepared for that and to set up for that, and then to bank on that and to play around that. And the reactive approach is to see what happens and just react, essentially, and never make a forward-thinking plan, but just to kind of react immediately to what's happening on the screen. So both of these things are necessary in terms of your gameplay. But what you can see here is you can see that when applied to an aiming technique, the predictive click timing approach here is inherently inconsistent, whereas the active click timing approach is, if it is inconsistent in practice, it only has to do with your skill at the technique, actually, because you're always going to be reacting to an opponent, and if you're not trying to predict where they're going, you're not going to be making kind of a series of mistakes that can compound. And I think that a lot of you will understand what I mean here, because you can see it happening right here in this clip. Compounding errors in aiming, because you kind of go tunnel vision on a prediction, and you kind of there's this kind of sunk cost situation that happens, where you just make repeated errors, because at any point here STYKO could just react to his opponent, but he is very invested in just trying to predict consistently what his opponent's going to do and have his crosshair then set up for that. But he keeps becoming, he's just wrong and then wrong and then wrong. So what's really interesting here is, again, I look at this as a scale, and I want to be in the middle of this scale, where between predictive mindset, whatever, and reactiveness on the other end. And there's more reasons for this, because the predictive thing in your mind that allows you to do that, I would say, is generally going to be more system one sort of type of thinking, where it's more conscious thing that is happening. Whereas, again, if you go really deep into the reactivity, I feel like you're kind of going deeper into the sort of subconscious or the system two, the higher bandwidth level of thinking that your brain is capable of. And so an example of this would be, for example, if you had a ball and you throw the ball at a bucket that's, in the distance or whatever. When you throw the ball, you have a feeling as to whether that's going to hit or not inside the bucket. However, you don't have a sense of how any of the trigonometry that just happened to calculate the trajectory and the force of that throw. You don't have any way for your kind of system two thinking to present that in its raw form. all you get is a feeling. That is the presentation you get. That is the feedback you get from what's happening there in your brain. Now, this is the same thing when you understand that you just beat someone on a timing, and you just know. How many of you, I'm sure so many of you have had that feeling where you haven't even seen your opponent maybe in a couple of rounds, but you know, based on the position that he plays, based on what else happened inside the round, based on like other information you did or did not give the other team, like all of these like varying factors, you just know 100% that when you swing this corner, that guy's like his pre-aim is going to be just completely in the wrong place because he never expects you to be there, and you just own him, and you've got a timing on him, and you just know that. It's the same thing as throwing the ball and hitting it in the bucket. Is that our kind of subconscious, is essentially, or the system too, or like however you want to describe this level of thinking, it's very high bandwidth, and it does all the pattern recognition, like the model recognition, all these different things. It's stuff that we just get a feeling for or a sense for. So you want to have that online, and you want to have the ability to communicate to your teammates, to be kind of more in that conscious, part of your brain. You want to have the ability to make a plan with your teammates off of what you see on the mini map, or to do your active comms as well as your passive comms, like whatever. So there is an important purpose of both of these systems. What you'll also find, by the way, is that something that kind of helps you to get into the zone is when you're able to be not just focused but also very relaxed, because the kind of emotional calm, or I mean, it's different from person to person, but for me, that's how I experience it. I experience the flow state where you have your A+ performances as this like really like amazing synergy of these two systems, where I have amazing focus on what I'm doing, but at the same time I'm very relaxed and reactive, and I'm able to see any information and immediately respond with full confidence and attentiveness. And it's just this perfect kind of fusion of those two optimal states. So anyway, I just thought that was like an interesting side tangent, because it's something I've been thinking about a little bit recently. So maybe I should have put a warning for people to be able to skip that one. But anyway, let's get back into the rest of this. So let's have a look. So when it comes to our program, one of the weaknesses that we were able to assess was heavily related to pistols. Since with pistols, we can't rely much on our well-trained sprays, we have to rely much more on our aiming habits related to adjustments and click timing. Big TAC FPS skills. This being said, we've been heavily relying on prediction while dueling with guns like the USP, and this way we were not really consistent with our aim on them. Okay, so building up reactivity, an active approach to aim, neutralizing predictive approach to shooting. Okay, so we discovered during our sessions that we had a problem with relying on prediction a lot, which caused lots of inconsistencies while being present to situations with more movement. This issue was mostly evident with our pistols, with which we have a way smaller window of error due to lack of spraying ability. In terms of aim trainers, the categories of aiming in which influence of prediction can be highlighted the most are definitely related to scenarios with lots of direction changes, such as tracking or dynamic clicking. Okay, so this is like one way that you can level up your ability to win fights when people are when you're just playing TAC FPS, because if you get really good at the reactive feeling and how to kind of turn that on a bit more in your aim when you're kind of in these kind of these AD kind of aim duels, you're going to be in a really good spot, because there is a distinctive feeling difference. We talked about that kind of sense of that feeling now, and also by the way, like that's really helpful with technique, like we said with the throwing of the ball. That's like got to do with your sense for how much power you should use, but also it's going to be a lot to do with your technique that allows you to kind of better do that math, as it were. And so in this sense as well, you're going to get a feeling when you're trying to be in that reactive mode, as opposed to when you are in that more kind of predictive mode. Again, when you're in that predictive mode, what you'll find is your brain's going to be focusing a little bit harder than when you're in the reactive mode. Because when you're in the reactive mode, you almost want to go kind of like soft vision, like soft focus on your vision, and just feel the movement. Don't try to think about where it's going to go. Just feel where it is at any given time. Just feel the movement of the object. So these two things are different feelings. And so again, the reason why I highlight this is because if you're able to kind of identify these feelings for yourself when you're playing, you'll be able to figure out like, okay, well, am I doing it correctly or not? Because if the whole point of this method is to help you adjust your technique, much like with arm tension, so that you have less arm tension. The whole idea with the predictive being too predictive or switching into a more reactive state, it's kind of like reducing like mental tension in a way. So I just want maybe that's a good way to think about it. Okay, so so in terms of the aim trainers, the aiming categories that influence the prediction can be highlighted the most. With lots of direction changes, tracking, and or dynamic clicking. Okay, yeah. So we understand that. So predicting, preemptively anticipating the target, has to strafe now, which makes us cancel our aim by waiting for the target to do its strafe that we imagine will happen, with which really often causes us to miss on the easier strafe. So we kind of talked about this, like the sense of like compounding loss with predictive aiming. While predicting can help a lot in specific situations, especially inside the game from the raw aim perspective, while dueling, we can't be certain that the target will stop or move the way we envision. This is such an important point. I've kind of touched on this, but this is such an important point for everyone to understand. While dueling, we can't be certain that the target will stop or move the way that we envision. So we don't want to be envisioning where they're going to stop or move. We want to be trained in such a way that we're always in a state of reactivity in an ideal world. And again, when you're a really good player, you understand what are the moments when you switch this on, switch this off. To what extent do you have it versus do you not? In at least, I would say. So work around being building up healthier habits that might bring us good benefits in duels that involve lots of direction changes. Okay, so despite predicting having its best way of isolation on tracking scenarios in our case, since we've not had much experience with tracking heavy drills due to our Counter-Strike background, we decided to use a different approach to isolate our reading and active approach. During the first week, while building up the structure of reacting rather than predicting, we decided to use multi-clicking scenarios, which is dynamic targets that we have to click multiple times, which heavily reflected the type of aim that is present in CS. So we got the task at hand here, and I wonder if I should like zoom this in a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the task at hand, you can see that it's got these little micro changes in direction. These two scenarios showcased above were present in our routine, so we could improve our click timing on moving targets by actively reacting to strafes and clicking them with the penalty of prolonged waiting in case of us not trying to adjust to them and giving up. After getting the foundation with our aim training, we also started playing more tracking scenarios to isolate similar things. Okay, so we've got the tracking. Yeah, you can see it's so funny to see this type of aiming because when you watch the really good tracking players, they're just like glued onto the target. But this is kind of more reminiscent of like the struggle that I had getting back into this as well, where you have to not just get good reactivity, but like good smoothness on your direction changes. But I think just like Minnie's saying here, you have the opportunity to really build a reactivity, because that's how you get really good at this is through being reactive to the target and not trying to really predict the target. And you can see that's happening a little bit. So yeah, interesting. Right, so going on to the next notes. When it comes to the scenario shown above, so this is Minnie's comments, our approach was simple. We decided upon benchmark scenarios that would be barely played throughout the duration of the program to kind of track our mouse control development across weeks. We played this scenario 2 to 3 at the beginning of the program, 2 to 3 in the middle, and 2 to 3 times towards the end of the program. The reasoning was for not playing as many of these tasks during the duration of the program was to observe our raw aiming techniques without any influencing factors that can occur from multiple plays of a scenario, such as knowledge about the spawn areas, time to kill of bots, movement, etc. The task above was meant to showcase our abilities to smoothly track the target and respond to direction changes while doing so. Okay, that makes sense. So you set aside a task to be able to kind of use as a measure for the raw aim improvements. So STYKO couldn't just like get good at it with practice. VT control staves Valorant. So after. So just, yeah, definitely better reactive aiming here. You can still see some of some similar issues to the previous one, but it's a lot more confident. The smoothness is definitely a lot better when he's actually getting the track. Yeah, it definitely looks a little bit better. We made a conscious effort to focus on properly reacting to strafes rather than trying to predict them while playing scenarios that were punishing us for predictions, and this paid off with us being way more comfortable with responding to strafes actively. We were able to make extremely noticeable improvements in both our aimless training and inside the game. Yeah, this one looks really clean. This is the best clip so far. And accuracy with adjustments at long ranges, at long distances. Oh yeah, classic. This particular clip, take note of how we are actively overshooting our micro adjustments and how inconsistent they are. Our initial session in Discord talk pointed out towards the talk about tension and its impact on our aiming ability. How increased tension levels while adjusting makes us less consistent at applying them. Yeah, that's true. Like the more tense you are, it's gonna be very difficult. Tension is really good for speed, but when you get into like the microcorrect territory, that's when it tends to start harming you if you're too tense. It can be hard to make consistent adjustments. So which is exactly what Matty is saying. So not adjusting and resorting to recoil, our comfort approach. Oh yeah, this is a great clip actually. So this is kind of the equivalent for any of you Valorant players out there, where you just hit the crouch key and you just get wrecked because of it. In Valorant, obviously, I feel like that's a good example because you don't need to crouch, and in almost every situation, I feel like crouching actually the vast majority of the time is going to be worse than just resetting and continuing to kind of move, like, you know, AD, whatever it is. Okay, so we observe how instead of trying to just adjust, we were trying to resort to recall without attempting to correct our shots. Okay, well, I mean, obviously with good recoil control too, it makes sense why you would want to confidently kind of feel like you could back yourself up with that, but it's definitely a good catch as a leak. One of our goals within aim training was simple: developing a high level of comfort while performing micro adjustments with our wrists by actively enabling ourselves to rely on these new habits while aiming in Counter-Strike. So you've got some honestly significant changes in how STYKO is going to approach aiming technique. These are, I would say, bigger changes potentially than EliGE, what we saw with the EliGE report. Fluidity with our wrist and micro corrections. Our main goal was to reinforce our technique by building up the more confidence within our flick landings and adjusting thanks to decreasing the levels of tension while performing our motions. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about the levels of tension here. So when we had that clip previously, this one, where you got like a lot of tension on these long range movements, this can oftentimes happen. This is not a good example of it, but let's say you did a big flick to the window, like you see him like jumping at the corner of your eye, and then you do a big flick to get to the window. What happens for that big flick, like we said, is that with the speed comes a lot of tension. That's how you get a lot of speed, is a lot of tension. And so if you then get to the window and you don't at any point adjust your arm tension, what you have is now less control on the movement. So that's a situation where that commonly becomes an issue. It comes up, I would say, as an issue. So yeah, with that said, we've got these sort of this task here to kind of help with that. Because the targets are moving ever so slightly, you have to maintain that fluidity with your micro corrections after doing a bigger flick. So you're gonna have a bit more arm tension on that initial flick, and then to just accurately track these targets and not miss, and because you're not spamming the shots here, you need to have less tension so you can be fluid. So this is actually a very intelligent task to use for this purpose, because I would say these orbs are actually moving at a decent, like a good enough speed to make it so that you can't just like flick on them. You have to adjust. And the way that they're kind of going, you know, up and down in sort of the plane of movement also means that you really truly have to have fluidity to go any direction consistently and smoothly. So I like this task quite a lot for this. Okay, the main thing that we struggled with in the clips above was control over our flick landings. While our click timing was good enough while we were in the vicinity of the target, the acquisition and the small micro motions that we had to do were visibly not as comfortable, which can be presented by the shaky nature of our motions. Okay, yeah, we kind of highlighted some of these things. Because here's the MRA micro shot afterwards. Yeah, so for these, and in my experience as well, and Mini's a really, he's a big fan of having very little tension, I would say, and being very smooth when you're at the, let's say, final movement of your flick, when you actually click the target, like to be, because he feels like you can go a lot faster if you have less tension and you have more control as well, which I definitely agree with. And this is looking actually really good from STYKO here. You've got a way better control and confidence. So this is not only just this like a clicking task that he's executing the technique with really well, because on these tasks what you want to do generally is you want to aim slightly ahead of your target. So there is that predictive nature in that sense that you want to aim slightly beyond your target, because then what you want to do, and this is helping you to practice the click timing skill, is you have click timing. You click when the orb is about to cross your crosshair, and so that's a really great way to be very consistent and effective at these tasks and the technique. And it gives you both the opportunity to train that reactivity, the micro corrections and fluidity, as well as that predictive element of click timing, which is actually pretty huge in TAC FPS. So, and a lot of TAC FPS players have very poor click timing, and it's an easy one to improve at, and it's something that can be very beneficial. If you're holding angles, for example, and someone swings, like the reaction time obviously is important, but obviously like you also have to just have good timing. Like, there's so many free kills when people are running through your crosshair. So they should just always be guaranteed. Okay, so stabilization of our flick landings and more confidence to click. Thanks to this comparison, we're able to observe that we visibly improved comfort within our flick ability at smaller distances, which opens up a window of judging the best aiming temp that we can follow to find a more steady pace with timing our shots on this particular scenario. Let's see. So in the above clip, we can appreciate our sharpness and confidence to adjust instead of resorting to spray due to us already being close to the target. Really nice, clean shooting. So, okay, what we have here, we've got our adjust click micro after. Let's see. So we're doing flick technique development over flicking and stability now. In this situation showcased above, the target swings us from a less expected position. Our initial flick ends up being an overshoot, which gives our opponent extra time to take a shot. However, in this situation, we got saved by usage of our own movement, which indicates we have a good habit of utilizing our movement while aiming, hence why we would want to prioritize raw aim as the aspect to decrease the overall amount of overflicks, since relying on movement in our case is not a problem. Okay. Yeah, big overflick. Another example of it, us overflicking. From aim training perspective, our main goal was oriented around minimizing the distance between the target and the crosser after the initial movement. Example of our fast and snappy flicks. If we take a note, we also overflicked on the last target. Oh yeah, slight overflick there. As showcased in the GIF above, what we could easily consider one of our strengths within the flick technique, keeping the problem of overflicking aside, was definitely a more fast and rigid approach to flicks themselves. By keeping our current habits in mind, we didn't really want to lose that fast nature to flicking. So wanting to like really make sure that the strengths are maintained, that's really good. That's something that's been consistent with the Voltaic coaches in the way that they coach, which I really like. Because it also kind of helps to formulate the identity of the player in many respects, which is something I talked to Matty about on the podcast we recorded. This is like one reason why understanding your aiming strengths it can also be reflective of helping you to understand sort of like what kind of player you are a little bit more. Because some people are really fast and snappy and just have a lot of pace, and some people are the opposite of that. And so that confers certain identities with how you might want to make decisions about how you play the game too. So I always like that focus on, hey, let's treat every aimer as an individual. In order to allow ourselves to keep the snappier nature of the flicks, we use an easier speed target switching scenario such as VT Speed Switch 180 and VT Sky Switch for Skies at the start of our routines. This way we could use them to warm up before approaching new challenges while giving ourselves a window to push that speed. Okay, so really making sure to kind of train these overflicks a bit with like these big movements. You got nice little kind of micro corrects after each movement. So very kind of Bardossy, Barbpilly situation going on here. Big flick, micro correct. Rest of the scenarios in our routines were used to stimulate our range of comfort by forcing us to perform flicks at less comfortable distances while introducing the idea of stability. By stability, we mean static switching tasks in which we have to keep our crosshair on target after the flick for a prolonged period of time. By combining less comfortable flicks with the idea of stability heavily affecting the results by any unnecessary motions added upon landings, we were able to redefine our flick technique while not losing the snappy nature to our movements. It's a long sentence. So here we've got the mixture of flick techniques. This task's actually pretty fun because you get to do like all these different types of aiming. You can see the little bars going up on the side, which will kind of change the type of flicking. So you'll get some overflicks going on here as well. Okay, so here's the after though. It's always better to underflick. And the reason for that is because usually when you're flicking, you're creating a path there's a path that's created in your mind. Whether it's in aim lab in a static clicking scenario, whether it's in game and there's multiple opponents that you're going to be kind of looking at, or sometimes it's just an ordering of how you're going to be using your aim. And so the thing is, when you underflick, you can still kind of stay true to that kind of pathing that you've created in your head. If you overflick those, it just always feels more awkward and more inconsistent to have to kind of go back on the path, if that makes sense. So I feel like underflicking generally is preferable to overflicking with that regard. If you're going to have, if you get to choose which one you're doing, which we don't generally. So with that said, though, you can certainly, focus more on just kind of dialing down the speed a lot so that, you are more likely to underflick than overflick. But obviously we want to kind of keep training until we any over or underflick that we do is just so minimal that it's just a tiny micro correction. And that's what it looks like when you see the best players playing. Okay, flick technique and stability, minimizing the amount of overflicks, improving our stability, keeping the rigid nature of our flicks. So the improvement of expanding our comfort zone by usage of tasks with less comfortable angles and usage of speed switching scenarios allowed us to focus on balancing tension within our aiming better. By adjusting the tension levels to the distance of the flicks, we were able to preserve lots of control for our micro corrections, which we also trained at short distances while keeping our explosiveness with the wide angle flicks. Okay, so again, we're really seeing this this emphasis on this one key thing, which is if you are able to kind of optimize your tension when you do your initial flick, the bigger flicks, you want more tension to get that snap, to get that really fast movement. But if you have good timing and sort of good control in the arm tension to relieve it so that your landing is actually kind of soft, then you get more fluidity behind the movement. And so that's essentially what we're really talking about in this situation. And you can see that we've got more explanation on the underflick and overflick here. So in order to improve and decrease the overall amounts of unnecessary motions within our flick technique, we introduced the concept of underflicking, which I was kind of talking about just now. Ideally, we would always want to hit our shots directly. However, due to us being humans, it is nearly impossible to execute perfect flicks onto smaller targets 100% of the time. For that specific reason, we would want to prioritize either over flicking or under flicking while aiming in order to leave ourselves with more healthy habits. Under flicking is more beneficial in comparison to over flicking due to us not adding up unnecessary emotions after the microcorrection, as showcased above. Yes, you can see it's the same thing that I was talking about, where you want to basically maintain the pathing, and that would always be preferable than kind of having your crosshair go past the target and then having to go back to the target. That makes it a lot more awkward, and you're having to do ultimately kind of just, it feels like more movements, because there you flick, you've missed, and you flick again. Here you flick, you've missed, and you flick back. And now you got to kind of flick back to get on path. I don't know. It just feels not good to me. Either way, it's just good to be aware of. Everyone is different, of course. So maybe it's different for you. Additionally, under aiming allows us to preserve tension and exert less force. This is a great point, actually, that I did not mention. That is another benefit of the under flick. That with the under flick, because you're not flicking as far, we did kind of talk about this, you're going to have less tension. So it allows you to exert less force and go less kind of hard on this initial movement. So you're more likely to be able to reserve or preserve your tension, as opposed to the over flick where you're really tense to get so far, and then you kind of have to have really good tension control to bring that into a place where it's easy to control afterwards. Above, we can get some nice examples of a well-applied flick technique inside of the game. So just looking at this now, and yeah, like really calm, really snappy, really controlled. That's what you like to see. And then this vertigo clip. Excuse me. What's interesting here as well is that the tension's really nice, because you can see that this could be snappier. But it's only as snappy as it needs to be, which is really, really good, because it's a precision shot that he's hitting here as well. I could easily see an overflick happening there. VT angle shot Valorant before. So just looking at this before. Definitely looking shaky and not super smooth. And then here's the after. Cleaner lines. He's still got a bit of that shakiness, but you can see he's over flicking a little bit here, because that's how you do this task. You want to flick ahead of the target, and then because it's a click timing task, so those are not over flicks, because they are just that's the correct spot for the flick to go, is right in front of the target. Obviously, you want it to be as tight as possible, really, but this looks pretty good. The lines are a lot cleaner. There's less overall shakiness. You've got good speed. The smoothness is improved as well from the previous clip. Okay. So, movement reading, dynamic clicking, and evasive target switching. We played various dynamic and evasive target switching scenarios in order to expand upon our movement reading skills and peripheral awareness development. Most important skill that we practice thanks to these scenarios is oriented us around us learning how to read movements of targets in our peripheral vision, while already aiming and firing our shot at on a target next to our crosshair. This skill set is also used in-game when we are facing multiple opponents and there is a need to shoot at them with spray or enter click timing mode. Okay, another big one here in terms of points that are important to sort of like understand. When you are in situations with multiple opponents, what people often end up doing is, if we go back to that scale again, with multiple opponents, what you're doing is you're thinking, okay, in what order do I shoot these people? Let's say you've got like a trigger discipline moment is a good example of when a moment's gonna happen, and you're gonna think, okay, I'm in my prediction brain. I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna go to this guy, this guy, this guy. What often happens then is people go way too far into that, and then they like tunnel vision super hard on it. And they've brought their brain into this system of thinking that's way too over focused. And the part of the reason that happens is because of the pressure of the moment, because you know that you've got a bunch of free kills, and you know that if you fail, it's that you really fucked up. So there's a lot more pressure in those moments. What you'll see really experienced players do is they'll just execute all of them, and it's just clinical. And if they wait, they are still able to keep their brain. They know exactly what is going to happen. And so they're not spending time over focusing on the predictive element. They're into the reactive element. They made the decision and they're staying in that more kind of reactive part of their mind where they're just kind of in that feeling mode and just ready to kind of like just kill all of the opponents. The moment that you start over focusing, and the moment where you have to react to multiple opponents at once, you're not going to read the movements correctly, and you're going to react slowly, and you're likely going to miss your shots as well. Your aiming performance will go down too. So you need to stay in that kind of right place. So if you're noticing that you're like overly tense in those moments, that's definitely something that is important to notice, because one thing that can help is if you understand how you're supposed to be in those moments. That's a huge plus. Most people don't understand how they're supposed to respond in these moments, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to feel. So what they end up doing is going into default mode, which is potentially, the pressure's affecting you and you get kind of wrecked. It's very similar to, let's say, if you're in a situation where, because this is a common question, people are talking about, tilt, for example. The way that you can defeat tilt is if let's say a common example of tilt being more kind of an anger response or frustration response, which kind of goes into like some version of a shutdown. That's triggered by something. It's triggered by your opponent, your teammate doing something, your opponent doing something. It's triggered by something. If you can notice the moment when the path of frustration starts, then you can nip it in the bud and you can prevent that escalation from happening. If you don't do anything because you have no awareness, and not even and you don't care, it will happen. It's going to happen because you are responding to a stimulus and your response is predefined at that point. So unless you interject, unless you intervene, it will be the same response. So if you have awareness of what's going on in the situation, you can identify how you should respond in the situation or what your goals are in the situation. Then now you can intervene and you can create a new behavior through changing your decisions that operates on a different framework that you have decided upon, as opposed to the other way around, it getting decided for you. So this is like a general principle, a general way to kind of, maybe think about things. But in this particular example, what we're talking about is having the awareness of what you're kind of feeling and what your mind's doing in these moments. Because if you get into them and you're the person that, whiffs on the first guy, or like never gets the 3K, right? That's like right in front of you. You can be thinking about some of these things and just think about like next time you're in that position that maybe, if that you're panicking too much, say, I just got to relax. And it's none of these kills are guaranteed, like whatever you have to say to yourself, none of these kills are guaranteed. All I understand is I have a priority list of opponents to go through, and that's what I'm going to do. And just like don't allow yourself to kind of get anxious in that moment too much. So again, like it doesn't have, there's not necessarily a perfect answer. This is why awareness is always like very important, because for every human being, there's going to be potentially like a different way to deal with a situation that's unique to you. So, having the ability for you to solve your own problems is a theme that's come up on my channel a lot. I would say, Matty was talking about it too. He was saying like, if you want to be a good aimer, you have to essentially be good at solving your own problems and stop being passive when it comes to your training. So, all right. So another tangent. See how many of those we've got left. We're already at 43 minutes. Nice. I know a lot of people listen audio only, so I figured that this could be kind of a interesting take to just kind of try this video and do it in a fashion that's good for those folks, even if you can't see some of these GIFs. Okay, so moving through the document here, we are moving on to improving our flick technique, efficiency, and reflex habits. Building up a more consistent approach to rely upon while reacting to unexpected swings and spawns. What usually happens when we were playing scenarios that required us to shoot at a target within a certain time window was that we were rushing our reaction on the target. So this is kind of similar to what I was talking about, those spots we were rushed. followed by our underdeveloped flick technique, caused a lot of inconsistencies with our aiming ability. As much as it's beneficial to try and react quickly, we should always maintain proper target reading habits before initiating our aiming movement. Oh, I love this point. I love this point because this is kind of like, to go faster and be better, let's slow down. It's kind of like it's kind of how it is. It's like, let's put something in before you actually react to just shooting everyone. So target reading habits. By being constantly exposed to similar hard situations with time limit windows, thanks to isolation that aim trainers bring, we were able to force the correct mindset of reacting not purely after receiving the stimulus, which is inconsistent, but with a tiny bit of buffer which allows us to get more information about the target's position and behavior. During training, our aiming motions should never happen before the reading process. So during training, our aiming motions should never happen before the reading process. So you can see an important distinction there. And yeah, this is STYKO's got some really great reactive stuff happening in some of these clips now. Okay, so before and after conclusion. So the aim goals we had set heading into this 8-week aim training program were as follows: improving our microcorrections, decreasing the amount of predicting while approaching strafing targets, decreasing amount of overflicking, getting a better idea of tension management, improving our movement reading skills, and building up our self-analysis skills and overall confidence in aiming. Throughout this program, we have seen diverse improvements to our aim, which is brought out by how the scenarios chosen cater to the mental side of aiming. The above sections focus on how each task in the routines both specifically targeted our weaknesses in our aim and helped us to understand the strategies that bleed over from AimLab into proper Counter-Strike mechanics. Our aim is certainly more consistent than in the beginning of the program, and our understanding of aim training scenarios has also been displayed through consistent scoring. One of the greater highlights of this program was our improvement in terms of enabling ourselves towards a more active click timing approach and our flick and reflex technique, which was visible on scenarios such as VT Mini's HS Strafe Flick. This scenario was really difficult for us on a first pass, but eventually we successfully learned how to implement proper flick technique under pressure with small window of time to shoot. This is essential for CS, and subsequent VOD reviews showed a great benefit. We would have liked to spend more time working on our tracking and evasive dynamic clicking scenarios. Most of our focus was limited to Counter-Strike for the majority of the program, for obvious reasons, but with the additional time, we could have delved further into tracking and dynamic technique, which could positively impact our movement reading skills. We also worked together on building aim training self-sufficiency. This means that we trained our ability to analyze the mistakes in our own aim by looking at adjacently skilled players in Voltaic Discord server by secretly helping involved players with improvement and comparing our runs with theirs. This develops our ability to diagnose errors in our gameplay for the future, and this routine building exercise playlist link, reading the link, was the product of our increased knowledge about aim training that we gained throughout the duration of the program. Below we have an example of our review and feedback from one of the players that was secretly involved. Let's see. Right, well, I think that kind of covers it pretty much. Got some aiming resources here, training resources here. Oh, this is nice actually. So we've got the why and the how here for the different tasks. This is great. This is the good stuff for you guys, actually. So if you guys are like looking to figure everything out with regards to how you can improve your sort of aim training, knowing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in the tasks, you know, the how here is really, really nice. So, okay, so hold mouse 1 for the entire run. So again, for those of you that are really unfamiliar with the aim training stuff, so oh, actually, he says hold mouse 1. Okay, so he's okay. So oftentimes in these switching scenarios, what you actually have is advice to take your shoot button off of the mouse, or at least to have the option on your keyboard to just have, like, you know, Control B shoot or something. The reason is because and this can be an option for some of you, when you're doing these switching scenarios, they're including a few different skill sets all at once, and the name of the game with aim training is often isolation. So one thing that you can do to help yourself to, let's say, improve your smoothness skill is to take mouse 1. I mean, you could have that shoot if you want, but shoot with like the keyboard a key instead, because that allows you to just say, I'm just going to focus on my speed, or I'm just going to focus on my smoothness, or the micro correction aspects of this. You get to be able to do that a little bit better. But if you're already trying to, and I think for Counter-Strike players, with all of the kind of recoil control and stuff, it definitely makes sense to have like be more practiced with tracking whilst you have the pressure on the mouse. When you're shooting with doing recoil control, I think this is definitely a good idea. But just know that you have the option to not do that, and many people don't do that. So what do we have here? The pulse shot strafing. So I'm just looking for any interesting hows. Mouse movements to scenario be similar to like scenario, changing initial flicks and micro corrections together. The target, and the click will be timed with the target meeting across that. Okay, so we talked about this. It's just about on these kind of dynamic clicking scenarios, flicking ahead of the target, because the reason is because you're practicing click timing. That's one of the skills you're practicing there. So that's how the techniques work. Blink click. Eliminate small blinking targets and then react to a newly spawned one that's doing. Okay, so some of these are just descriptions of the task. Try to be more active your aim, avoid prolonged waiting for targets to get into your crosshair. Do you leave? Do you want to perform small flick adjustments? Okay, so I'm just trying to mine for some additional gold here. See if there's any other kind of bits of advice or anything like that we can kind of use. Okay, try to focus on under aiming. Okay, we talked about that too. Okay, well I think that kind of covers it. This was a long one. We had a few little kind of interesting tangents there, so I hope you guys dig this one as well. I definitely think reading these things can be very helpful for any of you people that are kind of maybe experiencing some similar issues. You can kind of figure out how to kind of build your own program, and it can be pretty simple and straightforward because for example here we've got all of the tasks and sort of the links to I think there's a link to the playlist in here somewhere that allows you to play these tasks if you want. And so you could even just do a few weeks of just focusing on improving some of the things STYKO was improving here. If you really have no focuses of your own, but you're a CS player and you maybe saw yourself in some of these situations, that could be a good way to respond. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was a very kind of interesting take on this type of a video. So let me know if you guys liked that, and if you did, I will do some more. I'll do it more when we get another one of these coming out. These are few. I think these are the only 2 that exist currently, so not sure when that would happen. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.